The dust plume rose in the distance as Delia Grantham sat stiffly in the carriage, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild stallion desperate to break free. Eagle Pass, Texas, once a place she'd called home, was about to become nothing more than a memory if her uncle had his way. "You'll thank me one day, girl," Uncle Vernon muttered beside her, his thick fingers clutching a ticket that would send her eastward to Philadelphia. "No proper lady makes her life in a place like this. Your poor mother would be turning in her grave." Delia said nothing, her gaze fixed on the approaching train station. At 22, she had spent the 3 years since her father's death fighting to maintain their small ranch outside Eagle Pass. 3 years of hard work, determination, and slowly building something of her own. 3 years now rendered meaningless by a legal document naming her uncle as guardian, until she turned 25 or married. The whistle of the eastbound train pierced the afternoon air, sending a chill down her spine. Vernon had arrived just last week, armed with papers and plans. He'd already sold her father's ranch to the Hollister Mining Company for a fraction of its worth. Now, her future was contained in a single carpetbag at her feet. "I've arranged for you to stay with your Aunt Margaret," Vernon continued. "She'll introduce you to proper society. Find you a suitable husband." Delia's fingers curled into her palms. "The ranch was profitable. I was managing it just fine." "Women don't manage ranches," Vernon scoffed. "It's unseemly. Besides, the deal is done." The carriage pulled up to the station, where the massive iron locomotive was already waiting, steam billowing from its stack like angry breath. Vernon climbed down first, then extended a hand to help her. She ignored it, stepping down on her own, clutching her small bag. The platform bustled with activity travelers saying goodbyes, porters loading luggage, a group of cowboys leaning against a nearby post, watching the commotion with idle interest. One of them, tall with sun-bronzed skin, caught her eye for a fleeting moment. Something in his gaze made her breath catch. "Ticket, please, sir," the conductor said to Vernon, who produced 2 paper slips. "One for my niece, all the way to Philadelphia." He grasped Delia's elbow, propelling her forward. "All aboard. Eastbound train departing in 5 minutes." The conductor called out. Delia felt herself moving as if in a dream. The steps to the passenger car loomed before her. Each one would take her further from the only life she'd ever wanted. She glanced back once more at Eagle Pass, the dusty streets and small buildings that represented freedom. "Keep moving," Vernon hissed, shoving her forward. Her foot touched the first step and something inside her shattered. This couldn't be happening. Everything she loved, her ranch, her independence, her future, was being stolen from her in broad daylight. "I can't," she whispered. "You can and you will," Vernon growled, pushing her forward with enough force that she stumbled. The conductor stood aside, watching with disinterest as she was forced up the steps. No one was going to help her. No one cared that she was being sent away against her will. Delia felt the cool metal of the train's handrail beneath her fingers. One more step and she'd be aboard, destined for a life she never chose. Her vision blurred with unshed tears. Suddenly, a commotion erupted behind her. A deep voice called out, "Hold that train!" The force on her back disappeared as Vernon turned to see who was shouting. Delia glanced over her shoulder to find the same cowboy she'd noticed earlier sprinting toward the train. His hat was clutched in one hand, revealing hair the color of wheat fields in late summer. "Sir, we're about to depart," the conductor said impatiently, but the cowboy didn't slow. Instead, he lunged past surprised passengers, pushing through the small crowd. In one fluid motion, he reached for something along the side of the train, the emergency brake handle. The screeching of metal against metal filled the air as the brake engaged. The train lurched, sending passengers stumbling. Delia grabbed the railing to keep from falling as the locomotive shuddered to a stop. "What in tarnation?" the conductor shouted, his face reddening with anger. The cowboy stood tall, his breath coming fast. His eyes a startling shade of green locked with Delia's. "Madam," he said simply, extending a hand toward her. "I believe you dropped this back at the station." In his open palm was nothing at all. Delia stared at him, confusion mingling with a spark of something like hope. The cowboy's eyes held a message she couldn't quite decipher, but something told her to trust him. "You're mistaken, sir," Vernon cut in, stepping between them. "My niece has all her belongings." "Now, if you don't mind, we have a train to catch." The cowboy didn't budge. "Actually, I do mind." His voice was quiet but carried the weight of steel. "I couldn't help but notice the lady seems reluctant to board." "This is none of your concern," Vernon snapped. "Is that true, madam?" The cowboy asked, looking directly at Delia, ignoring her uncle. "Are you traveling east of your own free will?" The platform had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, the conductor, other passengers, even the station master who had hurried over at the sound of the emergency brake. Delia swallowed hard. This was her moment, perhaps her only chance. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'm being forced to leave against my wishes." The cowboy's expression didn't change, but something flashed in his eyes. "That's so." He turned to the conductor. "Sir, I don't believe it's railroad policy to transport unwilling passengers." The conductor looked uncomfortable, glancing between Vernon and the cowboy. "Well, this is absurd," Vernon sputtered. "She's my niece and ward. I have legal authority, ward." The cowboy interrupted. "How old are you, miss?" 22, Delia answered. "Old enough to make her own decisions, I'd say." The cowboy hadn't moved, but somehow he seemed to have taken command of the situation. "Especially about where she lives." Vernon's face purpled. "Now see here, you have no right to interfere in family matters. I have papers. Papers don't mean much out here," the cowboy said evenly. "Out here, we believe in a person's right to choose their own path." He turned to Delia again. "What do you choose, madam?" The question hung in the air. Delia felt the weight of it, the importance of this moment. She looked at her uncle, the train, the ticket in his hand, and then at the cowboy who had just pulled the emergency brake for a woman he didn't even know. "I choose to stay in Eagle Pass," she said firmly. "This is my home." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. The cowboy nodded once, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Vernon lunged forward, grabbing Delia's arm. "You ungrateful little—" His words were cut short as the cowboy's hand clamped down on his wrist, removing it from Delia's arm with calm efficiency. "I wouldn't," the cowboy said softly. "Not here, not now." The station master stepped forward. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem," the cowboy answered. "The lady has decided not to travel today. Her uncle, however, is still free to go." Vernon looked around, seemingly realizing he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed at Delia. "Without my support, you have nothing." Delia lifted her chin. "I have myself, that's enough." The conductor cleared his throat. "Sir, if you're traveling, we need to depart. If not, I'll need that ticket back." Vernon glared at them all before shoving past the cowboy and stomping back down the platform. "Keep the damn ticket. And you," he pointed at Delia, "don't come crying to me when this God-forsaken place ruins you." The conductor signaled to the engineer. "Release the brake. We're already behind schedule." As the train prepared to depart, Delia found herself standing on the platform beside the cowboy who had just changed the course of her life. The realization of what had happened, what almost happened, washed over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible over the hissing steam of the locomotive. "I don't even know your name." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. Kieran Murphy. He extended his hand. She took it, feeling the calluses of hard work against her palm. Delia Grantham. Pleased to meet you properly, Miss Grantham. He released her hand and retrieved his hat from where he'd tucked it into his belt. If you don't mind my asking, what was your uncle trying to take you away from? The train whistle blew again as it began to pull away from the station. Delia watched it for a moment. Knowing her uncle was not on board, he was likely storming off to find the local law, to continue his fight to control her future. My father's ranch, she answered, turning back to Kieran. Or what's left of it. My uncle sold it to the mining company, but I haven't signed anything yet. The foreman is a friend, he might still be holding the papers. Kieran settled his hat on his head. Then I reckon we should pay him a visit before your uncle causes any more trouble. Delia raised an eyebrow. Well, Kieran said with a slight shrug, I've already pulled an emergency brake for you. Seems a shame not to see this through. For the first time in days, Delia felt herself smile. Mr. Murphy, I believe I could use an escort. As they left the station together, Delia couldn't help but wonder at the strange turn of fate that had brought Kieran Murphy to that platform at that exact moment. She didn't yet know that he had been watching her for weeks, admiring from afar as she struggled to keep her ranch going. She didn't know that he had overheard her uncle in the saloon the previous night, boasting about how he'd sold off his troublesome niece's inheritance. And she certainly didn't know that Kieran Murphy, despite his easy manner, was one of the most respected ranchers in the county, with a reputation for fairness and a notorious dislike for the expanding mining operations. All she knew was that for the first time since her uncle's arrival, she felt a flicker of hope. And as they walked side by side through the dusty streets of Eagle Pass, that flicker began to grow. The Hollister Mining Company office stood at the edge of town, a squat wooden building with a freshly painted sign. Inside, Floyd Jenkins, the company foreman, looked up in surprise as Delia and Kieran entered. Miss Grantham, he said, rising from his desk. I wasn't expecting to see you today. I thought you were headed east. Change of plans, Delia replied. I understand my uncle brought you some papers regarding my father's ranch. Floyd shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to Kieran. Well, yes, madam. He had the legal authority as your guardian, except he doesn't, Kieran interrupted. Miss Grantham is of age and sound mind. Unless there's some official court document naming him guardian, which I doubt, he has no authority to sell her property. Floyd frowned. He showed me papers. Were they notarized, officially witnessed? Kieran pressed. Or just something he drew up himself? The foreman's silence was answer enough. Delia stepped forward. Mr. Jenkins, you've known me since I was a child. You know that ranch belongs to me. My father built it with his own hands, and I've kept it running since he passed. Whatever my uncle told you was a lie. Floyd sighed deeply. I suspected as much. The papers didn't look quite right, but Mr. Hollister was eager for the deal. That land sits right on top of what our surveyors think is a rich copper deposit. It's not for sale, Delia stated firmly. Not at any price, Floyd asked, eyebrows raised. Mr. Hollister is prepared to be generous. Not at any price, she repeated. That land is my heritage and my future. Floyd nodded slowly, then opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. The sale hasn't been finalized. Your uncle took an advance payment, but without your signature, the deal can't go through. He slid the papers across the desk. Take these. If your uncle comes back, I'll tell him the company has reconsidered. Delia took the folder, relief washing over her. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. As they stepped outside, Kieran touched her elbow lightly. That was well done, but your uncle won't give up easily. especially not if he's already spent that advance payment. I know, Delia sighed, but at least I have proof now that the ranch is still legally mine. What will you do? Delia clutched the folder to her chest. Go home, back to the ranch, it's all I have left. Kieran studied her face. Your uncle mentioned you were managing it alone. Yes, most of the hands left after my father died. I've been running it with just 2 old cowboys who worked for my father for years. They're loyal, but she hesitated. They're getting on in years. That's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone, he stopped himself. Let alone a woman, Delia finished for him, a challenge in her voice. Kieran smiled. I was going to say let alone someone with limited resources. Running a ranch takes money as well as grit, Miss Grantham. She couldn't argue with that. The last 3 years had been a constant struggle to make ends meet. The drought 2 summers ago had nearly finished them, and they were still recovering. I manage, she said simply. I don't doubt it. He glanced down the street. You have a way back to your ranch. I'd offer you a ride, but I walked into town today. I can hire a wagon, Delia said, though the thought of spending money they didn't have made her wince internally. Actually, Kieran said, tipping his hat back slightly, I have a better idea. My ranch is just north of town. I could loan you a horse and perhaps even ride out with you just to make sure your uncle isn't waiting to cause more trouble. Delia hesitated. She barely knew this man, despite his timely intervention. And yet, there was something trustworthy about him, something solid and reassuring. That's very kind, Mr. Murphy, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition. In fact, he seemed to consider something. I've been meaning to speak with you about a business proposition. This might give us the chance. Business proposition? Delia couldn't hide her curiosity. I'll explain on the ride if you're amenable. The logical part of Delia knew she should be cautious, but the events of the day had already upended any semblance of normal judgment. Besides, she reasoned, if Kieran had wanted to take advantage, he'd had plenty of opportunities already. All right, Mr. Murphy. Lead the way. Kieran's ranch sat nestled in a gentle valley about 3 miles north of Eagle Pass. As they approached on horseback, Delia riding a gentle bay mare Kieran had saddled for her, she couldn't help but admire the property. Unlike many of the hardscrabble operations in the area, the Murphy Ranch showed signs of careful planning and prosperity. The fences were well maintained, cattle grazed on green pasture despite the season, and the main house, though modest, was solidly built with a wide porch wrapped around it. You've done well for yourself, Delia observed as they rode through the main gate. Can't take all the credit, Kieran replied. My father started this place. I've just been lucky enough not to run it into the ground. You're too modest. Good ranching isn't about luck. Kieran glanced at her with newfound appreciation. You sound like someone who knows the business. I grew up watching my father, and these past 3 years, I've learned more than I ever wanted to about cattle, drought, and wolf predation. They dismounted near the barn, where a ranch hand immediately came to take their horses. Kieran led Delia to the house, but stopped at the porch steps. I promised to explain that business proposition, he said. The truth is, Miss Grantham, I've been looking to expand my operation. Your father's land, your land adjoins mine to the south. It's good grazing territory. Delia stiffened. If you're about to make an offer, Kieran held up his hands. Not to buy, to partner. Partner, she echoed, confused. A joint venture. We combine our herds, share the workload and expenses, split the profits according to the size of our initial contributions. He leaned against the porch railing. Your land and my resources could make for a profitable arrangement. Delia studied him, looking for signs of deception. Why would you offer this? You hardly know me. I know enough. I've heard about how you've kept that place going against all odds. That tells me you're determined and capable. He paused. And frankly, it makes more sense than watching your place get swallowed by the mining company. Once they start blasting and digging, it affects every ranch around them. It was a logical explanation, but Delia sensed there was more to it. Still, the offer intrigued her. A partnership would solve many of her immediate problems while allowing her to maintain ownership of her land. "I'd need to think about it," she said carefully. "And see the terms in writing." Kieran nodded. "Of course. No rush on your decision," he straightened. "For now, let's get you home. I imagine those two old cowboys are wondering what happened to you." As they prepared to continue their journey, Delia couldn't help but wonder if this day, which had started with such despair, might end with a new beginning. The thought both excited and terrified her. They were about halfway to the Grantham ranch when they spotted the dust cloud approaching from the direction of town. Kieran reined in his horse, motioning for Delia to do the same. "Riders coming," he said, his voice tense. 4, maybe 5. Delia felt a knot form in her stomach. "Vernon." "Possibly. Let's get off the main trail." They guided their horses into a stand of cottonwoods that ran alongside the road, watching as the riders drew closer. Delia recognized her uncle's portly figure atop a borrowed horse, accompanied by 3 men she didn't know. "Who's with him?" Kieran murmured. "Not sure, not local from the look of them." The riders slowed as they approached the junction where the trail split toward the Grantham ranch. "Hired guns," Kieran said quietly. "Your uncle's not wasting any time." "What would he need hired guns for?" Delia asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "To intimidate you, or worse, to force you off your land one way or another." Vernon and his companions took the fork toward her ranch. Delia felt a surge of panic. Illy and Hank are there alone there in their 60s. "If those men hurt them, we'll take a shortcut," Kieran decided. "There's a creek bed that runs behind your property. We can cut them off before they reach the house." Without waiting for her response, he urged his horse forward, leading them deeper into the trees. Delia followed, her heart pounding. The thought of her uncle bringing violence to her home filled her with cold fury. She'd lost so much already: her parents, nearly her ranch. She wouldn't lose the 2 men who had stood by her through everything. The creek bed Kieran mentioned was dry this time of year, providing a natural path through the rugged terrain. They rode hard, the horses sensing their riders' urgency. Within 20 minutes, they emerged from a small ravine onto Grantham land, the ranch house visible in the distance. Vernon and his men were just approaching the main gate. "We need to get to the house first," Delia said. Kieran nodded, and they spurred their horses into a gallop, taking a direct route across the open pasture. The sound of hoofbeats alerted Vernon's party, who turned to see them racing across the field. Delia and Kieran reached the house moments before the others, dismounting quickly. Illy, a grizzled cowboy with a permanent squint, emerged from the barn, shotgun in hand. "Miss Delia. Thought you'd be halfway to Philadelphia by now." "Change of plans," she said breathlessly. "Vernon's coming with trouble." Hank appeared from around the side of the house. "Who's this?" he asked, nodding toward Kieran. "Kieran Murphy. He helped me avoid that train ride." Recognition dawned on Illy's weathered face. Murphy's boy. Heard good things. Before more could be said, Vernon and his men rode into the yard. The 3 strangers spread out slightly, hands hovering near their holstered guns. They had the hard, calculating look of men who sold their violence to the highest bidder. "Delia." Vernon's face was florid with rage. "You made a fool of me in town." "You did that yourself," she replied coldly. Vernon dismounted awkwardly, his eyes darting between Delia and Kieran. "So this is why you refused to leave. Some saddle tramp turned your head." Kieran stepped forward. "Mr. Grantham, I presume. I'd advise you and your friends to leave." Miss Grantham has made her position clear. One of the hired men, a lanky fellow with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, spat on the ground. "This ain't your business, Cowboy." "I'm making it my business," Kieran replied evenly. Vernon pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "I have legal guardianship of my niece until she turns 25. She's coming with me, and this property is being sold to the Hollister Mining Company. The deal is done." "No, it isn't," Delia countered, holding up the folder she'd retrieved from Floyd Jenkins. "The sale was never completed and your guardianship is meaningless. I'm staying right here." Vernon's face contorted. "You ungrateful little," he turned to his hired men. "Get her on a horse. We're taking her back to town and then east." The men exchanged glances, then began to dismount. Illy raised his shotgun. "That's far enough." The scarred man smirked. "Old-timer, that scattergun only has 2 shells. There are 3 of us and we're faster than you." "Then I guess I'll have to choose which 2 of you go first," Illy replied, his aim unwavering. Tension crackled in the air. Delia moved closer to the house, where Hank now stood with a rifle of his own. Kieran remained where he was, positioned between Delia and Vernon's men, his stance relaxed but alert. "It doesn't have to be this way," Kieran said to Vernon. "Your niece is a grown woman with a legal claim to this land." "You have no right to force her anywhere," Vernon sneered. "And who are you to interfere? Some cowboy with delusions of grandeur. Do you know who I am?" "I have connections back east, powerful friends who aren't here," Kieran finished for him. "Out here, your eastern connections don't mean much. Out here, we respect a person's right to their own property and their own choices." "Mighty high talk from a man facing 3 guns," said another of Vernon's hired men, a stocky fellow with a drooping mustache. 3 guns plus his. Kieran nodded toward Vernon, who indeed had a small derringer partially visible in his vest pocket. "Against 2 rifles, my revolver, and whatever the lady might have." He glanced at Delia, who had retrieved a small pistol from inside the house and now held it with quiet determination. The odds weren't as favorable as Vernon's men had initially thought. The standoff continued for several tense moments, no one willing to make the first move. Finally, the scarred man spoke. "Mister, we were hired to help escort a young lady east. Wasn't nothing said about a shooting match with half the county." He turned to Vernon. "You want to renegotiate terms, or shall we call this job finished?" Vernon sputtered in outrage. "I'm paying you good money." "Not enough to die for," the man replied bluntly. The third hired gun, who hadn't spoken yet, nodded in agreement. "Lady seems pretty set on staying. That wasn't the job we agreed to." Vernon looked between his hired men and the determined faces opposing him. For the second time that day, he found himself outmaneuvered. His face purpled with rage. "Fine," he spat. "Keep your worthless patch of dirt, but don't come crying to me when you're destitute." He jabbed a finger at Delia. "Your father always was a fool and you're just like him." Delia's grip tightened on her pistol, but her voice remained steady. "My father was a good man who built something from nothing. I'd rather be like him than like you any day." Vernon stormed back to his horse, struggling to mount in his anger. His hired men, sensing the job was over, backed their horses away, keeping a wary eye on Ellie's shotgun until they were at a safe distance. "This isn't over," Vernon threatened as they rode away. "You'll regret this defiance." They watched until the riders disappeared down the trail toward town. Only then did the tension break. Ellie lowered his shotgun with a grunt. "Damn fool never did have any sense. Your pa would have been proud of you today, Miss Delia." Delia felt the adrenaline draining from her body, leaving her shaky. "Thank you, Illy. Both of you," she added, nodding to Hank. "For standing with me." "Always will," Hank assured her, resting his rifle against the porch rail. Kieran had remained quiet, watching the road where Vernon had disappeared. Now he turned to Delia. "Your uncle won't give up easily. He's the type to hold a grudge." "I know," she admitted. "But what more can he do? The ranch is legally mine." "Legal doesn't always mean much to men like that," Kieran said grimly. "We should be prepared for him to try again." The "we" didn't escape her notice. Somehow, in the span of a few hours, this stranger had become an ally, perhaps even a friend. Ali cleared his throat. "Miss Delia, you mind introducing your friend properly? Figure we owe him a debt for bringing you back to us." Delia made the introductions, explaining briefly how Kieran had intervened at the train station. As the men spoke, she took a moment to truly look at her home, the small, weathered ranch house, the barn that needed new roofing, the sparse herd of cattle visible in the distance. It wasn't much by some standards, but it was hers. Today she had almost lost it all. "Miss Grantham mentioned you're running short-handed," Kieran was saying to Ali. "I could spare a couple of my men to help out for a few weeks, until you're on more solid footing." Ali glanced at Delia, deferring to her authority. She rejoined the conversation, touched by Kieran's offer but cautious. "That's very generous, Mr. Murphy, but we can't afford to pay additional hands right now." Kieran's smile was warm. "Consider it part of our potential partnership. If you decide against it, we can settle up later." Before she could respond, Hank interrupted. "Riders coming. Different direction this time." They all turned to see a cloud of dust approaching from the east, the direction of Hollister's mining operations. As the riders drew closer, Delia recognized Floyd Jenkins at the lead of a small group of men. "More trouble," Illy muttered, reaching for his shotgun again. "Let's find out," Kieran said, stepping forward as the mining company men rode into the yard. Floyd Jenkins dismounted, removing his hat as he approached Delia. "Miss Grantham, Mr. Murphy," he nodded to each of them. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "What brings you out this way, Mr. Jenkins?" Delia asked, her voice cooler than usual. She hadn't forgotten the man's willingness to buy her ranch out from under her. "I owe you an apology," Jenkins said, surprising her. "After you left today, your uncle returned with quite a story about you being mentally unfit to manage your affairs. He tried to convince me to proceed with the sale anyway." "And did you?" Kieran asked sharply. Jenkins shook his head. "No, sir. I've known Miss Grantham since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. There's nothing wrong with her mind except maybe a stubborn streak a mile wide." He smiled faintly. "Just like her father." Delia felt some of her tension ease. "Thank you for that, at least." "There's more," Jenkins continued. "Your uncle also threatened to bring the law down on all of us, claiming kidnapping, coercion, all manner of nonsense. He's in town now, trying to convince Sheriff Davis to ride out here." Kieran frowned. "Davis is a reasonable man. He won't be easily swayed." "Maybe not, but I thought you should be prepared." Jenkins hesitated. "There's something else you should know, Miss Grantham. Your uncle has been in contact with Hollister for months, long before he showed up here. He wrote to the company claiming you were mismanaging the ranch and offered to facilitate its sale." The revelation struck Delia like a physical blow. "Months, but he only arrived last week." "He's been planning this for some time," Jenkins confirmed. "I found the correspondence when I went looking for the proper ownership documents after you left." "Why tell me this?" Delia asked, studying the foreman's face. Jenkins sighed heavily. "Because what he did wasn't right, and because Hollister isn't the only one interested in your land." He glanced at Kieran. "Word around town is that Murphy here made you a partnership offer. I'd consider it carefully if I were you." With that cryptic advice, Jenkins donned his hat again. "We'll be heading back to the mining camp." "For what it's worth, Miss Grantham, I'm glad you stood your ground today." He mounted his horse and led his men away, leaving Delia with even more to consider. As evening approached, Delia sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Kieran had stayed through the afternoon, helping Ellie mend a section of fence that had been neglected too long. Now he sat beside her on the porch steps, his hat resting on his knee. "Your men work well together," Delia observed, watching as Ellie and Hank tended to evening chores with practiced efficiency. "They're good men," Kieran agreed. "Loyal, like Ellie and Hank," she sighed. "But two aging cowboys can't run a ranch this size, no matter how loyal they are." "Is that your way of reconsidering my partnership offer?" Kieran asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Delia turned to look at him directly. "Why did you really help me today, Mr. Murphy? The truth, please." Kieran met her gaze steadily. "The first time I saw you was about 3 months ago at the cattle auction in San Antonio. You were arguing with a buyer who was trying to cheat you on price. You stood your ground, got a fair deal, and handled it with more dignity than most men I know would have." Delia remembered that day. It had been a difficult negotiation, but she'd managed to sell their small herd for enough to keep the ranch going through winter. "You noticed me then?" Kieran nodded. "Hard not to. A woman alone at a cattle auction draws attention, but it was how you carried yourself that made me take notice. And that's why you helped me today, because you admired my business acumen." There was skepticism in her tone. "Partly," he admitted, "and partly because I've seen what happens when mining companies move in. They destroy good grazing land, pollute water sources, bring in workers who have no respect for neighboring properties." His expression hardened slightly. "My offer of partnership is genuine. Your land adjoining mine would create one of the largest spreads in the county. Together, we'd have more leverage with the cattle buyers, more resources to improve both properties. And my uncle's involvement with Hollister, that just accelerated my timeline." He smiled ruefully. "I was working up the courage to approach you properly, maybe at next month's town social. Wasn't planning on pulling any emergency brakes." Despite herself, Delia felt a smile tugging at her lips. It was quite the introduction. "Not my most subtle moment," Kieran agreed, "but it worked out." They fell silent, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Delia thought about the day's events, about how close she'd come to losing everything, and about the man sitting beside her who had risked himself for a woman he barely knew. "I'll consider your partnership offer," she said finally, "but I have conditions." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "This remains my land in my name. I continue to live here and have equal say in all decisions regarding the combined operation, and Ali and Hank stay on as long as they wish." "Those seem reasonable," Kieran nodded. "I have one condition of my own." "Which is?" "You give me a chance to court you properly." His voice was soft but direct. "Not as part of our business arrangement that stands regardless, but I'd like the opportunity to know you better, Delia Grantham." The unexpected proposal sent warmth spreading through her chest. She studied his face in the fading light, the strong jawline, the earnest green eyes, the small scar near his temple that she hadn't noticed before. "That's a very forward request, Mr. Murphy." "Kieran," he corrected gently. "And yes, it is. But today has reminded me that life can change in an instant. Sometimes you have to take a chance when it presents itself." Delia thought of all the obstacles still facing her, her uncle's lingering threat, the mining company's interest in her land, the struggle of maintaining the ranch. Adding romance to that mix seemed foolhardy at best, and yet, "All right," she found herself saying. "You may call on me, but our business dealings remain separate." Kieran's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As night fully descended on the Grantham ranch, Delia felt a strange sense of peace despite the day's turbulence. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't facing her challenges alone. The following weeks brought changes to the Grantham ranch. True to his word, Kieran sent two of his best hands to help with the most pressing repairs. The partnership agreement was drawn up by Judge Wilson in Eagle Pass, with terms favorable to both parties. Delia's cattle were combined with Kieran's larger herd, instantly improving her financial situation. Vernon made one more attempt to assert control, arriving at the ranch with Sheriff Davis in tow. But the sheriff, after speaking privately with Delia and reviewing the documentation of her legal ownership, refused to support Vernon's claims. "She's of sound mind and legal age," Davis told Vernon firmly. "The ranch is hers, fair and square. I suggest you head back east before you cause any more trouble in my jurisdiction." Faced with this final defeat, Vernon departed Eagle Pass the next day, but not before delivering a parting threat. "This isn't over, Delia. Your mother would be ashamed of you." His words stung, but Delia refused to show it. "Goodbye, Uncle Vernon. I hope you had a pleasant journey." As spring bloomed across the Texas landscape, so too did the relationship between Delia and Kieran. True to his promise, he courted her properly, riding over for Sunday dinners, escorting her to church services in town, bringing small, thoughtful gifts like books he thought she might enjoy or wildflower seeds for the patch of garden behind her house. They worked well together, their complementary skills making the combined ranch operation more successful than either had been individually. Kieran had a talent for breeding stock and negotiating sales, while Delia excelled at management and planning. Together, they began to build something greater than what either had alone. On a warm evening in late May, Kieran arrived at the Grantham ranch house with a nervous energy about him. They sat on the porch after dinner, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "I received a letter today," Kieran said, breaking a comfortable silence. "From a lawyer in Philadelphia." Delia tensed. "Vernon," indirectly. "It seems he's filed a legal challenge to your ownership of the ranch, claiming fraud and undue influence." "That's absurd," Delia exclaimed. "The judge here already ruled, I know," Kieran soothed. "It's a desperate move that won't stand up to scrutiny. But it does mean you might need to travel east eventually to testify." Delia frowned. "I've never been east of the Mississippi." "Neither have I," Kieran admitted. "But I'd go with you if you wanted the company." The offer touched her deeply. "I would." Kieran shifted slightly, turning to face her more directly. "There's another way to strengthen your legal position if you're amenable." "What's that?" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Marriage would make your uncle's guardianship claims completely moot, even under Eastern law." Delia's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small pearl at its center. "It was my mother's," Kieran explained softly. "She always said it should go to the woman who captured my heart as completely as she captured my father's." "Kieran," Delia whispered, overwhelmed. "I'm not asking because of your uncle's legal threats," he clarified quickly. "I'm asking because these past months have shown me that what I felt that day at the train station wasn't just admiration or attraction. It was the beginning of something I've never felt before." He took her hand gently. "I love you, Delia Grantham. I love your strength, your determination, your kindness to Ellie and Hank, your passion for this land. I love the way you smile when you're pleased with something but trying not to show it. I love how fiercely you fight for what matters to you." Tears welled in Delia's eyes. No one had ever seen her so completely, appreciated her for exactly who she was. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Kieran asked, his voice slightly unsteady. "Not for legal protection or business advantage, but because I believe we could build a wonderful life together." Delia looked at the man before her, the man who had pulled an emergency brake to save a stranger, who had stood between her and danger without hesitation, who had seen her value when others dismissed her. The man who had, somehow, become essential to her happiness. "Yes," she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Kieran Murphy." He slid the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to kiss her their first kiss, sweet and promising and filled with hope. Sheriff Davis himself officiated their wedding 2 weeks later in the Eagle Pass Church. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which many saw as the union of two of the area's most promising ranches as much as the marriage of two people. Kieran and Delia cared little for such practical considerations as they spoke their vows, their eyes fixed on each other with a love that had grown quickly, but surely. Vernon's legal challenge evaporated when news of the marriage reached Philadelphia. Without the possibility of controlling Delia or her property, he abandoned his efforts, though he refused to attend the wedding or acknowledge the marriage. Delia and Kieran established their primary residence at the Grantham Ranch House, which they expanded over the next year to accommodate their growing needs. The Murphy-Grantham Ranch became known throughout the region for its quality stock and fair business practices. When Hollister Mining Company attempted to expand operations near their property, the combined resources of the merged ranch allowed them to successfully oppose the encroachment, protecting not only their land but that of neighboring smallholders as well. On a crisp autumn day, a year and a half after that fateful moment at the train station, Delia stood on the porch of their home, watching as Kieran rode in from the north pasture. Her hand rested protectively over her swelling abdomen, where their first child grew. She smiled as he dismounted and bounded up the steps to greet her with a kiss. "How are my two favorite people today?" he asked, his hand joining hers over their unborn child. "We're well," Delia replied, leaning into his embrace. "I was just thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't been at the station that day." Kieran's arms tightened around her. "I try not to think about that. Some things are meant to be, Delia. We were meant to find each other." "Such a romantic," she teased, though she agreed with him. "You know, I never did ask why were you at the station that day. You said you walked into town, but what brought you there at that exact moment?" Kieran smiled against her hair. "I'd heard rumors in town about Vernon's plans. I went to the station hoping to talk to you before you boarded, to at least tell you about the partnership idea, when I saw him forcing you onto that train." He shook his head. "Something just snapped inside me. I couldn't let you go." "My hero," Delia said softly, without a trace of mockery. "No," Kieran corrected. "You're the hero of this story, Delia. You fought for your home, your independence, your dreams. I just helped a little along the way." As the sun set behind them, painting the ranch in golden hues, Delia thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate moment on a train platform to building a life and family together. Sometimes the right person at the right moment could change everything. "I love you, Kieran Murphy," she whispered. "And I love you, Delia Murphy," he replied, using her married name with obvious pleasure. "Until the end of my days." 5 years later, the Murphy-Grantham Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in Texas. Their first child, a boy they named James after Delia's father, had been joined by a sister, Eleanor. The house that had once seemed too large for Delia alone now rang with children's laughter and the bustle of family life. Ellie and Hank remained, now more like grandfathers to the children than ranch hands, though they still insisted on doing what work they could manage. The ranch employed a dozen full-time cowboys, and their cattle operation had expanded to include breeding horses as well. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Kieran and Delia made it a tradition to take a private ride to a hillside overlooking their combined property. There, watching the sunset, they would reflect on how far they had come. "You ever wonder what your life would have been like in Philadelphia?" Kieran asked as they spread a blanket on the grass. Delia shook her head. "Never. This is where I belong." She looked out over their ranch with pride. "Though I do wonder sometimes what became of Uncle Vernon." As if summoned by her words, a letter had arrived the following week bearing a Philadelphia postmark. It was from a lawyer, informing Delia that Vernon Grantham had passed away following a brief illness. Having never married, he had died without direct heirs. The letter concluded with a surprising revelation. Despite his animosity, Vernon had left his entire estate to Delia's children. Perhaps in his final days, he had found some measure of remorse for his actions. "People can surprise you," Kieran remarked when she shared the news. "Yes, they can," Delia agreed, thinking of the man beside her, the cowboy who had pulled an emergency brake and changed her life forever. As Eagle Pass grew and changed with the advancing years, the Murphy Grantham family remained a cornerstone of the community. Kieran served several terms on the town council, while Delia established a small school on their property for the children of their workers and neighboring ranches. They weathered the challenges that came: droughts, economic downturns, the continuing pressure from mining and railroad interests, with the same determination and partnership that had marked their relationship from the beginning. And on quiet evenings, they would still sit together on the porch of the home they had built, watching the Texas sunset and marveling at how a single moment of courage, a cowboy pulling an emergency brake for a woman being forced onto a train, had led to a lifetime of love and happiness. For Delia and Kieran Murphy, it was proof that sometimes the bravest decisions are the ones made in an instant, guided by the heart rather than the head. And sometimes, those decisions lead exactly where you're meant to be.